example, you take children to a zoo. As an example, you take children to a zoo. Throughout, this is one example of experiential learning where the child can see the animal in somewhat created surroundings, even though it's not the natural surroundings. But I have time and again seen the teachers are so intent on explaining the species of the animal, what the animal eats, when the animal sleeps, what is the scientific name of the animal, what are the which phylum does it belong to, what are the genetic characteristics of this. For example, an elephant has a huge trunk. There is never this conversation that observe the lion or observe the elephant. What do you think? What does it make you feel? What do you think it is feeling at this point in time? This aspect of experiential learning is grossly missing at this point in time.
Welcome to episode 11 of the Learn and Unlearn podcast, where I have a conversation with Kavya Patnaik, co-founder and co-CEO of Konvos, a platform that's redefining emotional health through interactive mind experiences. Join us as we discuss emotional intelligence, mental health, the human brain, and more. Welcome, Kavya. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Gautam. Happy to be here.
To start with, can you please tell us about the vision behind Konvos?
Yeah. So before we actually go on to what made me build Konvos, I think it's important that I cover my journey as to what led me to this point where Konvos was built. So I am someone who comes from a community where of course, the mother tongue is not English, and even though that is the case, someone who has kind of fought through all odds to be where I am today. So through this journey actually of being, I was the first female and the youngest female in most of the situations that I found myself, and continuously I've asked myself, what is it that would help me actually move forward or succeed in areas that I want to succeed in life. And it has come back to me time and again that knowing who I am internally, not just what my strengths, what my capabilities, what my skills are, but who I am in terms of my emotions, where they come from, what are my biases, and how to question them. That has, I feel, led me to a much better place in life consistently than anything else that I have done so far. So, as an example, I was my first management or my first leadership position. I managed a team where the entire team was coming from a completely different culture. That was my first leadership position. The first time I was responsible for people, these people came from a completely different background. They were, their cultural nuances, their biases, their language, the way they thought was entirely different. And this was in Finland, and having led then teams both in India and in Finland, having lived in multiple countries, I studied in the UK, and then I worked with people from multiple backgrounds. I realized that being Indian, there is a strength to the identity that I bring, but that identity, the strength of that identity doesn't come out, doesn't take me forward, or I cannot use it if I am not emotionally intelligent. If I do not know where my biases, where they come from and what they mean, or where my emotions come from and what they mean. So I was able to bring in my identity, the uniqueness of who I am and where I come from, which I'm sure is true of everyone, into my work, into my life, into the way I interact with people. And that was the starting point for me to understand why emotional intelligence is so important for someone who is wanting to go against the odds and make it big. And this is the mission behind Converse. I want to enable the young aspiring Indian to actually become the best version of themselves. And this is something that quite a lot of people say as well. The, being you is your superpower. Being you, authentically you, is your superpower. And all of us, the world has this belief that that is not true. We are always aspiring to be someone entirely different. But in order to be you, you need to know who you are and being aware of emotions and managing the emotions in a healthy way, which is again constituting to emotional intelligence, is central to realizing your true potential. And this is what we are doing at Konvos.
Very interesting. Can you please tell us how self talk helps, especially talking out loud?
Yes. So actually, this is surprising that something as common as self-talk. Self-talk is something that each of us experiences. It is the dialogue in our head. So it is something that you listen to every day, or you've been listening to your whole life, but you're not aware of. So we believe that verbalization of this helps, and how it helps is, let's say you have a set of thoughts in your head. You have a set of emotions in your head that are being triggered by those thoughts. Have you heard of this auditory memory loop?
No.
So research basically proves that we recruit additional memory when you are trying to talk. So I've explained this before as well, that when you can hear without understanding, but you cannot talk without making sense. Have you tried it? Have you tried to talk without making sense?
Not exactly.
Yeah. So the idea is that when you talk, the focus is entirely on what you are talking about. And that actually recruits additional memory to your brain called auditory memory. And imagine that you are in a cramped space, and you have like enormous number of people in that cramped space trying to tell you multiple things, which is, let's say, your emotions or the thoughts that you're having. It always helps to recruit additional memory. So when you talk, actually you're recruiting an additional amount of space, so that you can explore, or you can look at all of these much more clearly. And research says that we spend almost 8 hours of every waking day kind of having this conversation with ourselves. So talking out loud helps in recruiting this additional memory in order for you to firstly focus on what you're saying. So that kind of grounds you, kind of brings you into the rational sphere to understand what you're talking about. And secondly, it recruits this additional memory that I'm talking about. And it can be useful in multiple areas.
Which are those areas? Maybe if you can elaborate a bit.
So, for example, in situations where the situations where you would happen to have, let's say, an anxious response to a situation. For example, you know that there is a unexpected situation in your life that is going to that has happened, or usually when you are about to have a panic attack, or an anxiety attack, there are telltale signs. So basically, you know that a particular thought process is very confusing for you. It is taking you towards a certain emotional state where that state would trigger a panic attack. So these are the situations where I would recall my focus by talking something out loud, so that it grounds me. So thereby avoiding the entire situation, the entire concoction of emotions, taking you towards the end of a panic attack or the end of an anxiety attack.
Wonderful. So this is like an activity that is done before the flood of emotions kick in.
Yes. So what we want to do is actually here prevention, and it's not essentially cure. So because once a panic attack or an anxiety attack, or a fear kind of kicks in completely, you are not in a fit state cognitively to do something to help yourself. Most without practice, that is. So you have to practice quite a lot in order to be able to regulate your emotions at that point in time. So what through Convos, what we want to do is help you prepare for such situations. So you practice talking out loud, whatever is bothering you at that point. So you bring your focus to an emotion that is most visible to you at that point in time, and talk about that, thereby bringing your focus. So when you're talking about it, your entire focus is on the particular topic that you're talking. You're trying to make sense. So your focus shifts from this state where you don't know what is going through in your head to your language center in your brain, to the talking center in your brain, which actually reduces. So the panic monster in your head at that point is actually waiting and listening to what you're trying to say, thereby kind of averting the entire sequence of events which can take you to a panic attack. Certain other situations that are actually right now we are building in Converse is, let's say, high performance situations where in a game, for example, for a sports person, let's say you as a sports person have given a lead to the opposition, to the the opposite player. Most often there is a self talk in the head, and sports people are very aware of this, which says, oh, you know what, you're such a loser, what, you just gave away the lead, you have to be more careful. So imagine if you could practice for the situation in advance, in your daily training, what happens then? So through practice, we hope that the line that comes into your head or what you tell to yourself in that situation is entirely different from what you would normally do. The same example for, let's say, preparing for a high stress interview, where, let's say, you are asked a question for which you don't know the answer or you don't know how to answer. So the entire idea of Converse is to remove that mental barrier you would have at that point in time and help you reframe that so that it becomes an advantage. Your self talk becomes an advantage at that situation that you're facing rather than it pulling you down and saying, you know what, I can't help you, or this is something that you can't do. So trying to reframe that situation and help you practice it is what the Converse is as a space for.
Got it. If it is in the mind, it's kind of vague. There is no form to it, and either writing it or talking it out loud gives it a particular finite form, which we can understand.
It's surprising that you say this because usually the way I explain this is imagine you are trying to generate electricity out of water, hydel energy, right? So if you have a turbine that is made of water, would the entire process actually work?
No,
Why is that?
both are made of the same material.
Exactly. So the whole idea that we can solve for everything in our mind, inside our mind, is as absurd as this for me. What we need is a change in paradigm, a change in state in order to be able to tap that energy out of that thought process or out of that emotion. So, as you said, talking about it or writing about it, again, I will go into how writing about it is a little more higher barrier than talking about it. Either of these activities actually changes the state of that thought, recalling your actually focus to that particular thought at that point in time, thereby harnessing the energy that is behind that emotion or is that behind that thought. That is the whole idea of the concept behind Converse as such.
Interesting. There are cases where positive talk doesn't help, especially when there is a flood of emotions or when we have a panic attack. How do we deal with such situations? I understand that what you mentioned is like the self talk is prior to getting into the flood of emotions or having a panic attack. But
Absolutely.
what do we do in case we land up in a situation where we have a panic attack?
So once the panic attack happens, it is a very cognitively very high energy task to be able to bring yourself back down into a state where a grounding state where you can make sense of things. So this is a situation for which prevention is definitely better than the cure. And what we are offering through Converse is the prevention for this and not essentially the cure for it. But despite that, it is possible to go through, let's say, what is the best possible thing that you could have when you have a panic attack? Like a friend beside you who can ask you the right set of questions or who
Yes.
helps you calm down. Yeah. So this is what we are doing with Converse. Usually, when you have a panic attack, there is a flood of emotions, and also there are a lot of physiological issues like you can't breathe, you can't think, you can't see, you can't hear properly. So all your senses are kind of compromised. So in such a at such a point, what happens to you? So what helps you ground is the right question. So I am not at all talking about positive talk in through Converse. That is not the idea at all. The idea of positive talk itself is a little absurd to me because without going through the underlying reasons for why a particular thought has occurred to you or why a particular emotion is being is coming to you, you cannot tap into the potential that comes out of self-talk. So self-talk is not just positive reaffirmations; it is much, much more beyond that. Because this is because reaffirmations are easy for people to understand, and also for people to, of course, promote them. The entire concept of self-talk has been limited to this positive reaffirmations. So that is not the idea towards Converse at all. So again, going back, what I was saying is when you have a panic attack, imagine Converse as a friend that can ask you the right set of questions so that it helps you ground yourself. Even if at that point you are not able to answer the questions, it is fine as long as that question triggers a thought process in your head and recalls your attention towards the answer in itself. That grounds you much more than you trying to solve for everything in your head. The right questions and the right triggers, that is what helps you in that situation, even if you're not able to answer them at that point in time.
Got it. I might not be aware much about the structure of the brain, but from the 5 second rule by Mel Robbins,
Yes.
what she mentions is that this counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then remembering an anchor thought. So that brings our attention to a different portion of the brain. Probably, is this also doing something similar?
Yes, absolutely. So for example, there is quite a lot of fear of failure that actually leads to quite a bit of panic attacks. And the 5 second rule that you're talking about, what exactly is going in your brain in those 5 seconds is the attention is being moved from a chaos or a whirl of situations or a whirl of emotions to a place where you know or you can control or you can feel or you touch. This is a basic grounding technique. That's what she talks about as a anchor thought. And what we are trying to do is something very similar, but in a much more organic way. So basically, you go into a panic attack, and the idea is not that um, you kind of come out of the panic attack immediately when you start talking to yourself. That's not the idea at all. We are trying to trigger, we're trying to provide the right set of questions and triggers to the brain at any point in time through your visual, through your visual sense, so that the thought that is linked to answering that question is triggered in your head. So basically, recalling attention using triggers. So, for example, there is quite a lot of fear of being judged, quite a lot of fear of being rejected that triggers these whirl of emotions that could lead to panic attacks in any individual. So the reframing technique that we are using here, of course, reframing comes a little later. The grounding technique that we are using here is one of providing the right questions and the right triggers to the brain at that point in time, so that the thought that you have in answering that question or responding to that trigger grounds you.
Got it. So it is basically shifting the focus towards the solution.
Yes.
Understood. I was watching a video that you posted where you have mentioned an interesting analogy. You have compared the mind to a garden
Yeah.
and the emotions as plants or weeds. Can you please talk about it?
Sure. Interesting that you say this. I believe that for a well organized mind, so someone who's aware of what is going on inside them, even a forest would look like a well manicured garden because they know what each plant does, what each plant is associated with, what each organism in that particular forest is responsible for or is affecting. So the idea of the mind garden is that most of us in this rat race that we are in continuously, we are not aware of what is constituting that garden in your mind. So the amount of thoughts and the amount of emotions we have around various triggers that we receive from the environment, we are not aware at any point in time what are the constituent parts of this mind garden. So what happens when you are unaware or you don't take time to be aware is that each even an interesting plant or even an interesting thought would start looking like a weed. And these are for me the mental issues or the everything that is termed as a condition. So the analogy to the mind being a garden and self-talk being a way to actually prune the garden. That is the concept of the video. Is that you shift the focus from your mind being a chaotic garden to observing those plants or those weeds under a different set of conditions. Let's say under a microscope that is apart from your brain. Let's say your voice becomes the microscope at that point in time, so that you can assess, okay, is this something useful to me? Does this even make sense to me? Is this even like helping me in any way? And you either understand the value of that thought at that point in time, and or ignore it, because when you talk about it, you have a much more rational outlook towards what you're talking about. So you say, okay, this fear is doesn't make sense to be. It's not irrational. So it's not rational, and that is the first step towards actually overcoming any fear. To observe it, to actually assess it on a different paradigm, on a different plane, and shifting from the mind to the voice is this paradigm shift that we are talking about in Convos. It makes observing, it makes assessing, it makes understanding much more easy.
So it is looking at things from a different perspective.
To be very simplistic, yes, looking at it from a different perspective. But as I explained to you, the water turbine concept. So it's so simple, right? So you have a turbine which is also made of water, and the medium that is which is water, and also the turbine which is also water, are clashing into each other, are seeping into each other. So that doesn't help. You cannot solve for everything in your mind. Shifting of the paradigm or shifting of the plane from the mind to the voice, or from the mind to the paper and pen, like journaling has proven quite a bit, is very important. It's very important to assess, very important to understand and rationalize the thought processes that we are having.
Yeah, our culture also has a kind of similar analogy where we consider the thoughts in our mind as passing clouds.
Yes.
There is another analogy where we consider our mind as an ocean,
Yeah.
and all the thoughts as waves arising and then merging back into the ocean.
Yes.
What is your thought about this, and how like being a witness helps?
Yeah, so this concept basically from the culture that you're talking about, where you are a witness to the thoughts in your mind, and the end goal is that you become a witness, so you know what to do with each of these thoughts that are coming to you, or the energy that these thoughts are delivering to you. So the end goal is to act. It's not that there is no action associated to it. You act, of course, but you act with an intention to respond and not to react. That is the end goal, right?
Absolutely.
So my problem is that this is I would say, the gold medal of the entire mindfulness or the entire meditative practice. So this is the trophy around which the entire concept of meditation and mindfulness today is looked at. So what we have done is we have turned something that is designed to give us mental health, mental awareness, and mental relief into a trophy that we have to chase continuously, which again has a feedback loop of giving us mental health issues because we are chasing that trophy.
Exactly. I mean, I can recollect this, like trying to clear out thoughts from our mind. Even if we observe, it's like it's a never-ending stream of thoughts.
Absolutely. If you look at it, so observation again, there are multiple levels of observation. So if you look at even mindfulness and meditation, there is no one kind of meditation. There are like a gazillion kinds of meditation, and each is suited to a different set of individuals. By actually branding mindfulness as just this, as being able to observe your thoughts as passing clouds and going beyond them, is like is really absurd to me, because there are multiple levels at which you achieve this. This is the end goal. This is the end goal of the entire meditative or the mindfulness practice. And by continuously pitching everyone towards this end goal, we are missing all the smaller steps in between. So, for example, let's say the end goal for everyone is in the business world. Let's say to be the CEO of a company. So continuously, you because you want to be the CEO, and that is the only thing that is visible to you at any point in time, you're failing at being, let's say, a front office assistant. You're failing at being a first level engineer. You are failing at being a first level manager. And throughout the hierarchy, you're failing. And the problem is that every time you fail, your mind is triggering a cycle of guilt that, you know what, you're failing. Why are you wasting your energy? So we are looking at a certain amount of unicorns who've become, let's say, CEOs the moment they started a company, and thinking that that is the normal state. What about the rest of 99% of the individuals? What happens to them? So I don't have a problem with the overall idea of the mindfulness practice that our culture kind of brings in. I have a problem with the way it is blanketed into one solution, and everybody has to race towards it. Everybody has to go towards it because it's exotic. It has become a medal, and if you fail, it is your fault. You are not trying enough. It's not that the system doesn't suit you.
Exactly. So it kind of becomes a spiritual burden, I would say. And then I get angry that I got angry. And I'm not supposed to get angry.
Yeah, this is really a rabbit hole, I would say. You just fall deeper and deeper into it. To be honest, as a tool, I use mindfulness as a tool as well. It helps sometimes, it doesn't help sometimes, and the intelligence or the wisdom is in knowing in what situations that helps you and in what situations that it's not suited for you, and you need to try something else. So this entire industry of mindfulness, where we sell mindfulness as the one, skeleton key for everything, is absurd for me. We as individuals, we know that each individual is unique, and luckily we have kind of also embraced that process. So why are we trying continuously to force a square peg into a round hole? Like this reminds me of like, let's say, the education in the 80s and the 90s, and some amount of education even now, where we focus on one dimensional learning, a single dimensional learning. You go towards IQ, you go towards logic, you go towards analysis. Not that it's wrong, but what happens to all the other dimensions in which learning needs to happen?
Very true.
So yes, our culture tells us this, and surprisingly, this is the only topic that we have picked up from our culture and have taken it seriously. There are a lot of other aspects to culture that point to other directions and which have been conveniently ignored because maybe an industry has not yet found the incentive to promote those. That is my honest opinion.
So can you please name those?
Yeah. Yeah, surely. So, just as a simple example, so anybody who has grown up in India has an experience with chanting. Let's say with prayer, no matter what religion you belong to. So, throughout the prayer, what we are doing is actually, let's say, to be to be put at a very ground level, is praising God. So, praising a better being is in the form of words that you use to describe different qualities of that being. Whether you take, prayer in Hinduism, in Christianity, in Islam, in Zoroastrianism, in any other Buddhism, any other religion, the prayer is in the form of praising a supreme being using these adjective words. What are we essentially doing here? So I am very curious about this. That what are we doing here? So I grew up in a majority Hindu household, and I seen my parents, my grandparents chant these 108 names of each deity depending on the day of the week. So each of those 108 is they're called stotras, I think, and each of these actually is a adjective to God, or kind of attribute a certain power or a certain capability or a certain skill to that particular deity. And I was always very curious, why do we do this? So like lately I have realized that what we are in essence doing is keeping God, or keeping the higher power in the place of a superhero for us, whose qualities we all want to imbibe. Isn't that the end goal? So we want to become more like God, or imbibe more of his or her qualities. So essentially what we are doing is self-talk here. We are This talking to God concept of prayer comes from there. So we are telling ourselves that there are these qualities inside you, and you are calling them out as much as possible so that they can manifest. So self-talk is much more prevalent in the culture, in Indian culture particularly, than any other form of communion with a higher force. And this is not brought to light in any industry. And this is one of the inspirations for us to build Converse the way it has been built.
Right. Whatever we focus on grows. So that's the
Absolutely.
idea of praising qualities of whichever higher power we are talking about, so that we imbibe those qualities.
Absolutely.
As you mentioned, why do we chant? I can probably answer that. The structure of the words, especially the letters in Sanskrit, is such that uttering them makes an impact on the mind and body, and that has been proven.
Yes. There are frequencies that impact your mind. Absolutely. Yes.
Yes,
And it's not surprising then that Sanskrit is the most suited language for computer programming.
very true. Let's say you rearrange the words of a particular sentence, it gives the same meaning in Sanskrit,
Yes.
but it's not the same case in English.
Yes, again, trying to fit a square peg into a round hole continuously to a point where the square peg is doubtful whether it's square or not because it's not fitting in the round hole. So yes, again, we are trying to continuously imbibe solutions that have not been made for us, not been made by us, do not have a cultural link with us because we aspire to be an entirely different identity that we can't connect with ourselves, and this is a big crisis, and this is going to be the next big mental health crisis for India, considering the amount of young population, the young working population. I think 2025 we will be the highest working population in the world. This the next biggest pandemic is going to be inside and not outside.
Yes, you have actually brought a very valid point. Emotional intelligence is going to be a kind of a future skill. It is an important skill now, but going forward, let's say 5 or 10 years down the line, as technology begins to take over the execution portion, we
Absolutely.
as humans need to focus on the softer aspects, and
Absolutely.
these are the key skills that will play a role in the next few years.
Yeah, actually, it's surprising. Interesting you said that I've always my focus has been on this individual. Let's say, imagine a two-tier or a three-tier, woman, just to make it a little more interesting in India, who has the deck stacked against her. The language in which she was educated was, let's say, not her own. She is continuously pushed towards embracing a language that is not her own, embracing a thought process that is not her own, but she is still brought up with the traditional cultural values that her family kind of brings into her. But she is expected to grow and succeed in an environment that is completely alien to her. Basically, has the entire deck of social and systemic, structures stacked against this individual, mentally, psychologically, even physically. So these are the mental barriers. So for this particular individual, my goal is to help this individual to remove the mental barriers that the person has. And the sure short way of doing this is to equip her with control, not just control, so awareness and health of her own emotions, so she understands and embraces her identity much more strongly. Because in order to go somewhere, in order to succeed somewhere, you need to know where you are. This is the biggest issue with young people today. It's very difficult. I myself went through that situation and I'm still going through that situation. I don't know where I am. And to be able to continuously understand where I am, to be able to continuously progress, I need to know where I am. And emotional awareness and emotional health is the central part to this. This is the user for Converse.
Very true. I can't agree more.
Absolutely, yeah. This,
Yeah,
yeah, kind of triggers a lot of passion talking about this
exactly.
individual. Yeah.
And can we attribute some of these anxieties and fears? to the biological makeup of the human brain and also the gut. Especially talking about the human brain, maybe the amygdala
Mm-hmm.
or the microbiome in the gut, because these also, as I have read, have a role to play in the emotions that we experience.
Absolutely. So there are two dimensions to this, and I will want to cover both the dimensions. One dimension is the amygdala, as you said, and popular the popular name to amygdala is the reptilian brain, or the fight or flight center of the brain. And this is a very simplistic or a very very reduced understanding of the amygdala that most of the population has. The amygdala in neuroscience is actually proven to be connected bidirectionally to six or seven other parts of the brain: the hippocampus, the from prefrontal cortex, the spine, and multiple other parts of the brain, which proves to us that this notion that amygdala is just a fight or flight center of the brain is very very simplistic, is very very reduced. And we do it because it is easier to explain or easier to disseminate this information to the population, that this is what the amygdala does. So apart from this, amygdala also is proven, scientifically proven, to associate a particular positive or negative weight to each neural input that you receive. So each input that you receive as an information from your senses, amygdala, based on its previous, conditioning or previous experiences, is supposed to associate a positive or a negative weight to each of this, which proves actually that amygdala is central to the formation of long-term memory. So your long-term memory is what you use when you're trying to draw upon your let's say intuition or your gut. Where does it come from? It comes from your previous experiences. It comes from whatever you've been exposed to in life. That is where it comes from. Just to give an example here. So let's say a child who is exposed to racism, not somebody who's gone through racism, but someone who's seen his or her parents or his or her, so it's the society around him, his friends, and so on, being racist to a particular group of people. For this child, at an impressionable age, what happens is, if in the absence of some other experience that tells this child that this is something that is wrong, the amygdala, the way it forms is, this is normal. Let's not go to the other side and say this is positive, but what the amygdala registers at that point in time is, this is normal. So imagine why we are having so much difficulty in changing mindsets now, because without the experience of that, yes, we can be empathetic, we can probably try to understand, but we will never truly understand without going through an experiential learning of what it means to have racism against you, the bias against you. So how do we impact the amygdala as young as possible, so that children, our next generation, have experiential experiential learning towards these kind of biases that we perpetrate in the society, and how at a very young age those impressions can actually help us uh, nurture a completely different and emotionally aware and emotionally intelligent set of human beings in the next generation. It takes enormous amount of rewiring and reframing and so much cognitive effort to be able to rewire something that your brain tells you that is normal, that you've seen, let's say, for 20, 30 years, sometimes even longer for people. It's a sad state, but sometimes even longer for people. Your brain says that it's normal. No wonder we are having so many issues in the world.
Exactly. I remember something that Dr. Shifali Sabari, she is an author
Mhm.
and parenting expert, who has said that we spend most of our lives undoing and unlearning what we learned in the first 7 years.
Yeah, she's bang on. She's absolutely right.
Right.
Yeah, actually, not to digress, but I feel these core concepts of bias, for example, the caste bias that we have in the Indian community, it's still true. Misogyny, where does all this come from? children being exposed to this continuously, normalize it, because that's the way the brain normalizes things. That's the way the brain is learning. So children imbibe all these behaviors as self-talk. So later on in life, when faced with a situation where somebody is being misogynistic, somebody is being racist, the self-talk not is not in a way that questions it, but is in a way that says, okay, this is normal. So what is the big deal about this? So, as an example, so my mother, she has been a teacher for about like 40 years now. And this concept of self talk, this is her key focus area. She says, and she practices it, that the self talk that the child has in any situation, and she's a primary teacher, not a surprise for me, that from the ages of, let's say, 5 to 10, most impressionable age for children, and memory formation age, and experience formation age, this is the age in which she focuses.
Interesting. Talking about children, given a choice, which topics or life lessons would you include in the curriculum?
To be honest, there is so much that can be done, and surprisingly and interestingly is also being talked about in multiple forums now. Uh, there is one central tenet that I want to talk about here. The one central thing that I want to talk about here. Experiential learning, this is not something new. Quite a lot of people have spoken about it, and quite a lot have imbibed. But my problem with the way experiential learning is done today is it is still focusing on IQ. So you experience something, and the way you learn from that experience is also very passive. So basically, there's no emotional interaction in that experience attached. So, for example, you take children to a zoo, as an example. You take children to a zoo. Throughout, this is one example of experiential learning where the child can see the animal in somewhat creative surroundings, even though it's not the natural surroundings. But I have time and again seen the teachers are so intent on explaining the species of the animal, what the animal eats, when the animal sleeps, what is the scientific name of the animal, what are the which phylum does it belong to, what are the gender characteristics of this. For example, an elephant has a huge trunk. There is never this conversation that observe the lion or observe the elephant. What do you think? What does it make you feel? What do you think it is feeling at this point in time? This aspect of experiential learning is grossly missing at this point in time. Why I'm saying this is important is, take any experienced and really, really successful artist in the world. I'm saying artist because unfortunately this has not happened to engineers yet, but maybe it has and it has not come out. So take an artist. Uh, an artist never talks about, this is how I thought through the process of making my music or making my art. You would never ask an artist what is the process in which you make your art, like what is the logic that you use. You always ask an artist, what do you feel about this, like what made you draw this. And we never ask this question to an engineer. What made you feel this design is needs to be this way? So feeling versus thinking is something that is a taboo topic in quite a lot of situations, in office situations, in education, and there's no place for feelings. And I want to ask why? Why is there no space for feelings? If you observe, if you observe, any kind of learning, a learning which is one dimensional. So basically, anything that a machine can do at this point in time, process oriented, logical, analytical, that can learn from data, you use IQ. But anything that goes beyond that dimension, where there is life involved, where there is art involved, where there is a different energy involved, you need feeling. And we kind of put this entire aspect of learning as simplistically feeling because we don't understand that part.
Exactly. It is good that we are opening up about mental health nowadays. How do we make it as open as seeking medical help when we get a common cold or flu?
Interesting that you asked this question. Now, if you think about it, 10 years ago, asking someone what their fitness routine is would have been very absurd unless that person was a bodybuilder or someone practicing fitness in a professional position as an athlete or as a sports person. It would have been very absurd if you asked someone what their fitness routine is. But today we can ask that. That's a question that you connect with people with. So what is your fitness routine? What do you do to keep yourself fit? And people see that not as an intrusion of their privacy, but as something that the other person wants to learn from them and something that they can be proud of. If we can position mental health and emotional health in this aspect, something that the person is proud of sharing with others, then we have crossed the barrier to people accepting mental health as important as physical health or even more important. So it's very important to notice the distinction that I'm trying to make here. Positivity is not just no, is just not the only goal. Normalization of mental health and having mental health routines and maintaining your mental health and having routines to emulate is something that needs to happen in order for this entire concept of mental health to be looked up to, not looked down upon. So even today, from the most affluent and educated societies to the someone who has like no idea, kind of goes from meal to meal, mental health is a big taboo. Therapy is a big taboo, and culturally as well, we are not accustomed or we are not used to this entire concept of therapy. It's a very Western concept. For again, I go back to the analogy where I said trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I think it's time the square peg realizes it's a square peg and builds a square peg for a square hole for itself. That is what we are trying to do using Converse. So mental health is not a one blanket solution, is not a one line explanation that you can give to anyone. It's not about relief. It's not just about reducing anxiety. Mental health is a core part of the human being, and the day we make mental health as easy to talk about as a fitness routine, when you can walk up to someone and say, "Hey, I like you. So what is your mental health routine? What do you do?" That is the state at which we need to make mental health. We need to reframe mental health so that people realize that this is a core skill to their living their existence. You cannot solve for global pandemics in one way. You cannot solve for global pandemics which take different form in like different communities in different societies in different geographies in one way. It cannot be a blanket solution, and without solving for it uniquely for that person, for that community, you cannot solve global pandemics. Only by understanding who we are, we can actually associate with others, we can connect with others, because then we know who we are and then we have respect for who the other person is. Without this, it's not possible to solve for any global issues. This is at the center of solving for all the major global issues that we are facing today. I was part of a social entrepreneurship program very recently, and the UN representative for health was here. Actually, involved in that program, and I asked the person, like, there are a set of goals. So there are these I think 13, if I'm not wrong, or 17, I forget now, 17 areas in which there are the sustainable development goals, SDG goals, that United Nations has agreed to focus on. In each of the areas, there are a number of goals that United Nations has called upon the world countries to work towards together to move forward, to progress upon. But my question to the person was that for each culture, for each individual person, for each small society, where in India every 20 kilometers the cuisine changes, the dialect changes, and everything changes. How do you apply these at a global level without actually involving the local sentiments without involving the local culture. And this is a major problem. And the answer that this person gave me was very eye opening. Like, this is something that even we don't have an answer for. And continuously we are being asked by governments, by local governments, how do we do this? How do we, change this goal that you have into something that can be applicable to this particular community here? And there are no easy answers.
Right. There might not be a one size fits all solution.
There isn't, is what I'm saying. There isn't a one size fits all solution. It is high time we start making mental health solutions for India that are culturally close, that are lower barrier, and that are for the the situation, the socio-economic situation in which the country is at that point in time. And it's high time to do that.
Very true. Can you please talk about your current offerings and your plans for the future as well?
Basically, at this point in Convos, we have Convos spaces. The idea behind Convos spaces is that we provide a safe space for the individual to come and talk about their emotions. And most often, what happens is you don't know what you're going through. And this is surprising for a lot of people, but it's very relatable that you don't know what you're going through. So, specifically for this, we have a flow called I Don't Know, where you can associate what you're going through with something that is visual rather than describing it verbally, which again needs a lot of thought process. So this is one feature that we have where you can come in. There is a safe space provided for you with questions and triggers that can take you through the process of understanding what you're going through at that point in time, and you can decide how you reframe it or how you use it for some to do something better with it, to do something better with that emotion. So how to respond to that emotion, that is what you could learn. This is converse spaces. We have similar spaces for exploring an idea per se, or you want to go and unburden. So you're feeling very heavy and you just want to unburden somewhere. So we have flows that we call converse spaces that you could use for multiple different situations that you would have in life. The second, what we have is Konvos rituals. So rituals again is a difficult word to understand, but um, if you take any high performing artist or a high performing athlete, there are certain things that they do during their practice or when they are playing the match or they themselves as individuals. So, our idea is to bring these structures or these processes into a space that somebody else could learn from them. So, we curate these rituals for high performance situations. So, for example, you're preparing for a game day, or again, you've just given a lead to your opponent. So, this is in terms of sports. Or you're preparing for an interview, or you're preparing for an IAS exam, or even if you're preparing to propose to someone. These are all life situations that most often you go to a friend or you go to somebody else to give to get advice. And even though that advice helps a lot, you need to have a practice, a space to practice your emotions in that particular state in order to be able to respond rather than react. So these are curated rituals that we provide in Converse that anyone with any context in life could come in and use in order to be able to handle that particular situation in life better. Now, where we are going towards in the future is I spoke about this concept of how we look up to superheroes, we look up to God, we look up to a higher entity and try to imbibe those qualities in us. So we are working with like a set of influencers and celebrities and trying to bring the mental processes that they have, the rituals that they do, the emotional health routine that they have to be accessible to others that want to emulate those. The beauty of this is that each individual has a different person or a different celebrity or a different influencer or a different achiever that they can relate with, and it's not a one size fits all solution. So you could tomorrow on Converse use the ritual that your favorite influencer or someone whom you look up to and admire uses to maintain their emotional health or become emotionally intelligent. You will be able to emulate those rituals, those practices in your daily life as well. That is where we are going towards in the future.
Wonderful. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
So it makes me curious. Can you please guide us through one such activity that we can practice while listening to this podcast?
Sure. So now let's do a small practice in self-talk verbalization. So self-talk, talking out loud, where I will help you, let's say, disconnect from a negative thought you have at this point.
Sure.
Think about a fear-based, talk, a fear-based line that is most troubling you. So something that you fear, and say it out loud. For example, I will fail no matter how hard I try. I am not capable of achieving my goals. I am not doing enough. What I am trying might not work. I'll never find the love of my life. I'm not good enough. My parents think I am worthless. I will never have enough money. So anything that comes to your mind, just say it out loud. Now that you've said it out loud, change the statement. Let's say I choose I am not good enough to something that a person would say to you, like a third person. For example, I will be a failure or I'm not good enough becomes Kavya will be a failure. Kavya will not be good enough. And say it out loud. If you've done that, then who does the statement sound like? So Kavya is not good enough, or Kavya will never succeed in life. Does it sound like your parents, your relatives, someone who bullied you in school, your ex-boyfriend, your ex-girlfriend, a friend, a colleague, your own inner critic? Who does this sound like? Visualize them. Now, let's say your relatives are telling you this. You know what? Kavya will never be a success. How would you respond now if someone said this to you? Just say it out loud. Respond out loud. What would you say to someone who says you would not be successful or whatever the negative thought was in your head? How would you respond to them? Talk it out loud. So the last step here is you take the thought, whatever the thought is that you've just said out loud. For example, I will not succeed. Now replace it with a constructive thought. For me, it would be, it's not that I will not succeed. I just need more practice. I just need to practice more to become a better presenter. So this thought is not helping me. This is a short example of a self-talk verbalization exercise that you could use to disconnect from a negative thought that comes into your mind that kind of troubles you. So just as a summary, take a negative thought in your mind and say it out loud. For example, I will not do well. I'm such a loser. I will not succeed. As a second step, say it as if somebody else is saying it. Use your name. For example, Kavya will not do well. Kavya will not succeed. As a third step, try to look at who you sound like when this is being said to you. So it could be your parents, from where this thought came from. your relatives, a friend, an ex-boyfriend or a girlfriend, a colleague, a bully, anybody. As a fourth step, imagine that they are saying it to you and answer, reply. What would you respond? If someone says, you will not succeed, that Kavya will not succeed, respond to that. And as a final step, replace the statement that you have in your mind with something constructive. What is the one small thing that you could do today to change that? So that's a short exercise in self-talk.
Amazing. Thanks a lot, Kavya. Thanks for your time. This has been a very absorbing conversation indeed.
Thank you, Gautam. Absolutely. Thanks for having Konvos here.
Thanks for listening. Please share this episode with others and let me know your thoughts. This is Gautam signing off. Until we meet again.